Buckle up, Buttercup, because this is about to be a little bit of a rough ride. What's up, y'all? It's your girl, Maya G, and you are tuned in to another episode of Operating on High, a podcast all about conscious cannabis consumption and centering Black voices within cannabis. How y'all doing today? How are y'all feeling? How is life? What level are you operating on? That's going to be my question now at the beginning. What level are you operating on today? Is it giving low, medium, or high? And so for me, I'm at a solid, I'll say medium. I will say medium. I do have me a good energy drink. Okay, ready to go. That kind of looks like pee, but that's not important. What is important though is that my energy levels are coming up, and so that's why I'm chilling at a good medium right now. But yeah, life is lifing. Life is definitely lifing. The world is in disarray. The world is surely in disarray, and it's like you have to keep going though. That's the thing. That's the part that sucks. It's like the bills don't stop, so it's like you got to keep working. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to deal with right now. It really is. So give yourself some grace. I'm trying to give myself a lot of grace and a lot of patience. So I hope that you're doing the same thing. Yeah. But I am excited to get into today's episode because I feel like, as you can see by the title, we're talking about the history of cannabis in America, and how America get down. And I'm gonna have to hold your hand through this one, okay? Because if you haven't done this research, if you don't really know the history of cannabis in America, then this information is going to shock you. It's going to shock you. It might not shock you because it's like, surprised by America and its racism and money hungriness. No, but disappointed. Absolutely. So, I mean, just prepare to be disappointed by American history, as I'm sure you already have prepared yourself to do so, especially being Black in America. You already know it's very racist past, and the racism continues throughout, just the history of cannabis within this country. So, buckle up, Buttercup, because this is about to be a little bit of a rough ride. But we're going to make it a little, I hate to say like fun, but we're going to smooth out this ride a little bit. And so if you are at home, now please consume responsibly, but we're going to make it a little game, okay? So every time you hear a crooked cannabis history fact, you're going to take a hit of whatever gardening materials you have with you. Okay. So me, I got a couple things rolled. And spoiler alert, it's a lot of crooked cannabis history facts. So make sure you got enough, and make sure, you also have your green out materials. You got your water, you're in a safe space and all of that. So please consume responsibly, but baby, we about to get into it. Okay, let me pull out this iPad. I hope she charged enough, child. Now, I'm not gonna lie, my iPad is on 5%. I hope it don't die on me. I really do, because I need my notes, okay? Because I did some research now, okay? I was reading the books. I'll also cite my sources at the end. That's how it really got for me, because I do know how to get down on some research and to do some reading and some history. I ain't scared to open a book, okay? And you're going to be able to tell by the information that will be shared today. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, and I'll go ahead and give you a heads up too. So we'll start with the origins of cannabis. So it'll be a little minute before we get to a crooked cannabis history fact, because of course, before cannabis was colonized, it was, and criminalized. It had a lot of medicinal properties and values that were used for eons and generations before, America got a hold to it and started doing what they do. So the first documentation of cannabis is in 2000 BC, and it was by the father of Chinese medicine. And so it is actually one of the 50 fundamental herbs of Chinese medicine and was prescribed for more than 100 ailments like gout, malaria, and poor memory. And in addition to China, cannabis is indigenous to India, and it was also found in more than 80 traditional Ayurvedic formulas. So that's the first documentation of cannabis. But cannabis is actually one of the oldest cultivated plants, and it was very important to mankind's beginning. So you see like the medicinal properties, but it also had other values long before it was documented, right? Okay. And then I'm going to skip forward just a little bit because our focus is cannabis in America. So through trade and colonization, cannabis was brought to America. And so let's skip forward to 1619. And so hemp farming is so popular in America that it is actually required by the government. Okay. Like you could literally be jailed for not growing cannabis sativa. And so, if you don't know, hemp and marijuana are both the same plant species, which is cannabis sativa. The only difference is the chemical makeup. And so, hemp is used for more industrial uses. It has a lower percentage of THC, and then marijuana, of course, is higher in higher in THC, and it has more medicinal properties, right? And so that's why everybody was like, okay, let's grow. Well, the government was like, let's grow this hemp because the hemp plant has a lot of different values in terms of just its sustainability. So the hemp plant regenerates the soil, it provides sustainable farming, like I said, and it does not require pesticides when farming. It also requires little water and is a natural habitat for birds and bees. So when you think pollination and thinking about, being able to sustain other plants as well. Hemp was that girl, essentially. Okay. And then hemp can also be used to make more than 25,000 products, including biofuel, auto parts, paper, upholstery, and fiber for cloth and like other textile items. So, very important because it had so many different uses and stuff. So, that's why, again, it was required by the American government. So, um, also, fast forward to 1850, cannabis is recognized for its medicinal benefits. So we went from the industrial uses with like early farming and the start of America to now it being recognized medically, and it was also added to the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, which is like it was the early documentation of the medicines that were very important within America. And so cannabis was an approved drug and treatment during the early days of American history. So 1619, we have the requirement and it's really used for industrial purposes. And then 1850, it's also used for its medicinal value. So you see here the American government at one point in time saw the value of cannabis sativa, the hemp plant. So you wonder, like, why did things change? Don't worry, we'll get into that. Okay. Alrighty. So fast forward to the late 19th century and into the 20th century, like everybody was doing all kinds of drugs in America. The only difference was essentially like which drug had the better PR team, like which drug were the white people saying like, okay, this one's good to you, this one's bad to you, so this is when we start to see, the white supremacy, the capitalism come into play here, okay, when it comes to cannabis. And so, like I said, everybody was doing all kinds of drugs. All right. So, literally, they was handing out drugs like candy. Black domestic workers were given cocaine by their employers to encourage better work. Very interesting. You see, recreational use. Okay. And then also, too, Americans were consuming 2.3 gallons of distilled liquor per year. And that's almost about the same amount as it is today. It actually might be a little lower back then. And I'm sure whenever they was, testing like who was drinking or like I guess getting the average consumption of alcohol, I'm pretty sure it didn't include women or black people. So this is probably not even the most accurate number, but either way, the history says 2.3 gallons was the norm back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, for alcohol consumption. So at this time, of course, pharmacy firms and pharmaceutical companies were actually really getting their start in the late 18th, 19th century. Because, like I said, drug use was just popular for both recreational and medicinal uses. And so, even though cannabis had been recognized for its medical benefits, it did start to lose a little bit of popularity because it was really like overshadowed by like tablets and pills. So aspirin and morphine were kind of starting to gain popularity because you could dose those a little bit better, and cannabis was a little bit more tricky, and so it wasn't as easily dosable, if that's the word, but that's why it kind of started to lose popularity. But it still, that doesn't, just because it wasn't popular, it doesn't mean that it lost its medicinal value, which is important to remember. So yeah, big pharmacists though, they were still importing weed, and particularly weed that you could smoke. So that's why they knew it was being used recreationally still, because it's like pharmaceutical companies were still trying to get that money. Okay. And they were like, well, if people ain't using it for medicinal value, I know they could have a good time with it recreationally. So yeah, everybody. So again, this shows that hemp, cannabis, all of that, we have industrial uses, medicinal uses, and also it was okay recreationally by this time. So remember, at one point in America, cannabis, sativa, hemp, marijuana, all of that was not only legal but a big part of like our early days as a country. And so that's when things was cool. It was, shit was sweet and all of that. So things started to get a little spooky ooky though, when like anti-alcoholism started to be on the rise, and that was known as the temperance movement, and it was really popular amongst upper class white folks, right? The temperance movement began in the late 1700s, and it started off as like, okay, a moral and religious movement, like, hey, we got to be better. We can't be consuming this much alcohol. They were trying to wipe it out completely. They were like prohibition, no alcohol whatsoever. Okay, and it was, at first it was like, oh, because this is morally correct. But then it began to be heavily supported by those who held anti-immigrant biases, right? The temperance movement really began to be an anti-immigration push more than an anti-alcoholism push. Let's be honest, because, and it really started because there was an influx of Irish immigrants who had just escaped the Great Famine in their country in the mid 19th century. And so, but the upper middle class whites, they were like, those whites are different from us whites. So let's make sure we have a sharp distinction between us. And they seem to be the people who drink, so let's be the people who don't drink. You see, so that was the mindset. Again, not morally based, more so corruption based. Okay. And so that is actually going to be our first cannabis crooked history fact. And you're like, well, that's not necessarily related to cannabis, but oh, you'll see how this, because this shows the anti-immigration biases that really started to infuse themselves in just how America conducted themselves. And I mean, look at today, child. We still, well, not we, they, them, not me, baby, not me, but y'all's president. Okay, this administration is very much anti-immigration because it's very much white supremacy. So you see that this mindset started to infuse itself into the country's like structure and institution. So that's why this presents itself as the first crooked cannabis history fact. Okay. Oh, so let me take a hit. All right, that's one. Because trust me, baby, you don't want to get too greedy. Just do one hit and put it down. No one is going to put me down. Good God Almighty. So, with all of this anti alcoholism sentiment, which was really based on anti immigration, marijuana started to be lumped into that. And as we know, it's because of what a lot of people believe is from Mexican immigrants bringing cannabis into the country. But that is actually not the case, right? Uh, so let's rewind a little bit and start digging into the other chapters of America's racist history with Mexican immigrants, which we know is still very much going on today. And when we look at Mexico's history, it was actually the Spanish who brought cannabis to Mexico as an industrial plant. So, like we mentioned before, it was used industrially with the hemp plant. And so it was the same thing in Mexico. And in the 19th century, sentiments toward cannabis in Mexico turned sour because of its recreational use within prisons and soldiers' barracks, right? So people were like, okay, well, if prisoners are using it and it's used in like soldier barracks, it's giving very much dangerous and it's associated with violence. So that is actually the reason why cannabis in Mexico began to have a negative sentiment. And it was actually Mexico who had a negative sentiment around cannabis before the US, which is very interesting because we usually see it, when we let them tell it, you know, it was America who had the negative sentiment first and then Mexico. But that's obviously not the case because cannabis was a big part of American history in its early days for its medicinal and industrial uses. And it was Mexico who had the negative sentiment first. And so, however, you know how America do, it began again like how alcoholism was. It was like allegedly a moral decision to, begin the prohibition of cannabis. But what it really was more of a discussion on who was smoking cannabis. And so it began, since it was associated with soldiers and prisoners in Mexico, America then took that and said, oh, well, Mexicans smoke weed, so that's why we're outlawing it. Truly, again, anti immigration sentiments is really the reasoning behind it. It's again, nothing moral, just straight racism. Okay. You're going to keep seeing that. And actually, that's another crooked cannabis history fact, because why is it that why does the anti-immigration of it all have to start to become why does the racism of it all have to become a reason why we're outlawing a very useful plant? So yeah, let's take a pause here and take it. And so this very much racist rhetoric around cannabis really began to become even more popular after the Mexican Revolution of 1910, which brought in an influx of Spanish speaking folks. And of course, then immigrants were lumped into all of the negativity around cannabis. And it became more of again, a racist reason as opposed to a moral impasse. And so also too, so that's the brown folks side of things. So now let's bring in the black folks. Okay. So in the 1920s, as we know, the popularity of jazz soars across America. Okay. And then a lot of jazz musicians at this time were also using cannabis to give them a leg up as they play. And one of the famous jazz musicians who is also a well-known stoner is Louis Armstrong, and he was really down for the marijuana movement, if you will. He was like, hey, if y'all gonna try to arrest me for just smoking weed outside, at least can I get a permit to be able to do this? Because Y'all really wilding out. And he said he smoked every day of his life, and it helped him overcome, a little bit of his shyness that he had off stage. I ain't gonna lie, if I smoke me a little blunt, I be, you know, I could talk a little something. And with jazz starting to jump off, that means that the jazz clubs was starting to bring everybody in there. Okay. So white people was starting to come to these jazz clubs. And the other whites, the racist whites, was like, oh no. White people smiling and happy with black people? I think the fuck not. Okay. And so that's when jazz and cannabis start to be heavily associated with one another. And it was again because of racist sentiments. Alrighty. And so the biggest op, okay, when you think about like who are the big racist people within cannabis, it really begins with Harry J. Anslinger, okay? In 1930, Harry J. Anslinger was appointed commissioner of the U.S. Treasury Department's, remember I said that, U.S. Treasury Department's newly founded Federal Bureau of Narcotics, okay? And how he got the job, you like appointed, oh, another official gave him that job. That is what happened, but what you got to do, you got to start doing the digging and the research, okay? The person who gave him that job was his wife's uncle. His wife's uncle. So it was nepotism yet again. No experience. This nigga had no experience when it came to narcotics. He didn't even have a science background. His uncle was just like, hey, I got a job for you. Go ahead and take it. And just so you know, he served as commissioner from 1930 when he was appointed to 1962. A man with no experience running an entire federal department. That will be the first crooked cannabis history fact right here, because trust me, it's about to get even worse. So let's take a pause right here. Nepotism is how we got that job. That's crooked as hell. Oh, but trust me, it gets way more crooked from here. So Anslinger was appointed in 1930, but the end of alcohol prohibition was in 1933. And you're like, okay, why did it end? Because it began as a moral thing, right? If it ain't racism, y'all, it's money. Spoiler alert. When you look at American history, if it ain't racism, it's about that damn dollar, okay? And most of the times, it's both. Okay. So, anyways, the United States, also in the 1930s, we're going through the Great Depression, right? And so, of course, money trumped morals. And the federal government turned to alcohol in order to infuse more tax money. And it also put an estimated 500,000 Americans back to work. It was about that dollar. Okay. Alcohol prohibition was not about morals whatsoever. So, with alcohol prohibition being over, Anslinger was like, ooh, well, I need me a little something else, another avenue for me to be racist. And I need a little something to line my pockets. Okay. And so he was like, let's turn our sights to cannabis, with alcohol not being the issue anymore. And mind you, before he got this job, before he was given this position by his damn uncle for 32 years, okay, he didn't have a problem with cannabis at all. He said cannabis was not a problem and it did not harm people. And we're going to take us, no, we'll keep going. We'll keep going. Well, no, actually, let's go ahead and take a pause right here. Because it's like, why are you switching up now? You before you got that job, you were cool with cannabis. But now things have changed. Okay, yeah, that's another crooked cannabis history fact. Okay. Oh, because baby, it's going to get even more crooked. Don't even worry about it. Oh my lord. Oh my goodness. So we finna get into some real tea right here, okay? Because y'all thought that whole nepotism thing was crooked. It gets worse. So there are quite a few theories, which I think are facts. Okay, theoretical, my ass. No, we can't go back and ask this nigga why the fuck he was doing this shit, but the facts line up to show that again he was being racist and he really just wanted to line his pockets. Here's the evidence. So let's get into what I like to call the trifling ass trifecta, okay? And this is the group of people who really began the frenzied attack on cannabis, and they had some trifling ass reasons why they were moving in the way that they were. All right, let's get started with it. So we have Harry J. Anslinger and his uncle who gave him the job, Andrew Mellon. Andrew Mellon is the Secretary of Treasury from 1921 to 1932. If you'll remember, I said the U.S. Treasury Department created the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Okay. So, yes, Secretary of the Treasury, right? But then he resigned from the Treasury Department in 1932 amidst accusations of improper business ties and impeachment proceedings. And let me tell you something. You can literally go on the Treasury Department's website, because that's what I did. Don't worry, I'm gonna cite my source. Like I said, this sentence right here is on the Treasury Department's website. So that means they kept it cute. I didn't dig no deeper here because I was already in very deep. But if the Treasury Department gonna say that he resigned amidst accusations of improper business ties and impeachment proceedings, and they was keeping it cute, he was doing some trifling ass shit. So he created a department. Well, I'm not gonna say he created it, right? But the Treasury created the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he already was doing some shady stuff money wise. So yeah, that's why they're at the point there of the triangle. Okay, so next part of the trifling ass trifecta. William Randolph Hearst, which is a very popular name. I'm not gonna lie, you probably know him because he created the nation's largest newspaper chain and media company, Hearst Communications. And so by the 1930s, William Randolph Hearst controlled the largest media empire in the country. So the 1930s, where we're set right now, because we're talking about Harry J. Anslinger and all the things that he did. Okay, so by the 1930s, when he was a part of the trifling ass trifecta, William Randolph Hearst controlled the largest media empire in the country. 28 newspapers, a movie studio, a syndicated wire service, radio stations, and 13 magazines. And if you don't know, there's a very famous quote, I do believe. It's like, he who controls the media controls the mind. So we've added a media giant to the trifling ass trifecta. And you see how the rhetoric around cannabis what it has been. And it was because it was started by somebody who controlled the media. So let's dig deeper into him, right? After the Mexican Revolution of the 1910, William Randolph Hearst lost 800,000 acres of land after the Mexican Revolution. And it was land that he had in Mexico that he no longer had access to. That's why his sentence, he very much began like a anti-Mexican immigrant like stance. And of course, because he controlled the media companies, he was able to easily spread that narrative, right? Okay. So, and he's also a very rich man. You can tell that. And even today, like I said, the Hearst Company is still around and thriving. The Hearst family net worth, according to Forbes, was reported at $22.4 billion in 2024. Okay. Don't worry, it gets even worse, right? Because we got to get to the other side of the trifecta. And so we have Lamont DuPont, okay? And so at this time, Lamont DuPont was creating a synthetic fiber called nylon, right? And you're like, why would somebody creating a fiber want to knock out cannabis? Well, because the hemp plant, like I said, can be used for textiles. And so Lamont DuPont was like, hey, I need to get this nylon off the ground. And so I need you to wipe out hemp as one of my competitors, which is what you can do now because you were just given this job to run the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, right? Okay. And so, according to Harvard Business School, DuPont kept the DuPont Corporation highly profitable during his tenure as president, despite the Depression of the 1930s. I wonder how they were able to be so incredibly successful. It's because they were attacking hemp. Nylon, a synthetic fiber. Hemp, a natural fiber. Why would the American government not want us to grow a natural fiber that's good for the environment, but they want us to have nylon, a synthetic fiber that is destroying the planet, along with polyester, because polyester is the number one synthetic fiber, nylon's the second one. Why? Right. Oh, and don't worry, I pulled the numbers for today too for nylon. The global nylon market size was valued at $32.6 billion in 2022 and is expected to reach $53.4 billion by 2030. So let's review the trifling-ass trifecta one more time, okay? So at the top, we have Harry J. Anslinger and his uncle who gave him the job, who was the U.S. Secretary of Defense, right? They're up here. They running point. I'll say that. They're the ones running point. And so his uncle had ties to William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst is a big media company owner, lots of money. He was very anti-Mexico because he lost a lot of land after the Mexican Revolution. And so that's why he had anti-immigrant sentiment, because he lost money. Okay. And so DuPont is telling Anslinger, like, your uncle told me that you got a job down at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. All right. And, cannabis is related to this hemp plant that is a natural fiber that's really getting in the way of me being able to get my fiber off the ground. Okay. So It's all about money and racism. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing it? The trifling ass trifecta, money and racism. It nothing with morality. Nothing with morality, nothing that's science based, nothing that's based in evidence. It was all moral corruption. It was all a lie. Like Carly Red said, it was all a lie. That is the crux of the beginnings of the criminalization of cannabis in America. Just money and racism. That's it. Just it's truly just money and racism. The negative sentiments that you have right now about cannabis is because a white man was trying to get some money. Mm-mm-mm. And so I'm gonna take, because for the trifling ass trifecta, I'm gonna take 3 hits, and I really just want you to sit and ponder with that. Like, it's truly all about just racism and money. You see that today, World War III happening outside, money and racism. Oh lordy. Money and damn racism. And like that. Oh, but it gets worse, baby. We're only in the 1930s. My goodness. Remember, y'all, trifling ass trifecta. My God. Okay. So for the trifling ass trifecta to work, Anslinger really had to show up and show out, and he had to spread a lot of lies and BS all across the media. Well, because remember, he got a media homie. He was like, let me just get the evidence together. Then you blast it in the media, William Randolph Hearst. So that way, American sentiment just becomes negative towards cannabis. And mind you, there wasn't a lot of conversation around cannabis like within the media before this. So some people didn't even know about cannabis. So one of the biggest headlines that Anslinger pushed around the racist rhetoric for marijuana is the story of the marijuana maniac, right? And so in 1933, Victor Licata, at the age of 21, murdered his family around 2 in the morning. At around 2 in the morning, and so what really happened, I'll go ahead and tell you. It was he was having a manic episode from schizophrenia, and but at this time, the police department and the media, William Randolph Hearst, and the media spun this in a completely different way from the facts, and it turned towards a bunch of just hoopla and bullshit. Okay, sounds like a bunch of hoopla. Yeah, that's exactly what this article was, right? So the detective on the case said that he heard gossip. He heard that Licata had started purchasing and smoking marijuana months before the murder, and said the addiction may have unbalanced Victor's mind. No evidence, just gossip. Okay, anyways, here we go. So then multiple media outlets took that and then they ran with it. But let's get into the facts of the case. Victor Licata's family had already noticed strange behaviors, so much so that his father was sleeping in a front room close to Victor's in case he became violent. Okay, Exhibit A. Exhibit B. Victor would also ride around and sip moonshine with the boys on the Honey Wagon, a sewage collection vehicle that emptied residential outhouses. So he was drinking. Okay. Okay. A psychiatrist argued that Victor was subject to hereditary insanity, arguing to the judge that 4 other members of the Licata family, an uncle, a brother, and 2 cousins were also found to be, in their words, insane. On top of that, his mother and father were first cousins. First cousins, which was a common arrangement in this family, and also therefore meaning that their children are going to have birth defects because of. I probably have to cut that word out there, but no. But the biggest kicker of them all, y'all, the biggest piece of them all. Victor Licata was given a marijuana test upon his arrest, and no marijuana was found in his system. So a lot of lies and hoopla again was spread, but not the actual facts or the evidence. Okay. Alrighty, y'all. Let's take a that's another cannabis crooked history fact. Let's take a hit. Okay, this is the last of this one. Did me a little extra on that one. I probably shouldn't have. That's all right. Okay. Let me drink me a little of this energy drink. But of course, as you know, the facts of the case don't matter once the media took a hold of the gossip. They ran with the unfounded idea that marijuana led people to be violent. Anslinger promoted anti-marijuana storylines in newspapers to propel negative public sentiment. He called them the Gore Files, a collection of quotes from policemen depicting marijuana users as addicts and villains. Spreading lies on a case that already did not involve marijuana. How you going? Like my friend always say, you can't rationalize irrational behavior. And you can't never rationalize racism to me. Like literally, this was some bullshit. Okay. Here we go. Another piece. He even put together 200 case files to prove that marijuana made people crazy. 200 case files to claim that marijuana made people crazy. But guess what? 197 of those 200 cases were proven not to have involved marijuana at all. The other 3 were found to be inconclusive. Mind you, one of those inconclusive cases was the marijuana maniac case. And that one didn't even involve marijuana. So if you telling me the only 3 that you got were inconclusive and the marijuana maniac one is one included in that, if Jimmy had 5 apples, that means all everything that you put forth in those Gore files was some bullshit. That was some bullshit. That's exactly what that was. Please be for real. Man. Also, on top of that, child, because don't worry, you know, he get more crooked. Mind you, he got this role for 32 years. 32 years. So he had a long time to be with the bullshit. Okay. So Anslinger once said, there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing results from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relation with Negroes, entertainers, and others. And that, all of that, is yet another crooked cannabis history fact, girl. Let's get into it. Mm. Sorry, I had to start that one up, so I didn't take 2 hits. I probably shouldn't have. Here we go. Let's keep going. Oh, don't worry, we're finna take another one. Here we go. In 1936, the film Reefer Madness was released, and it portrayed a trio of drug dealers luring teenagers to become addicted to weed through jazz music. Racist, yet again. Because black people like, now why I'm in it? For real. I mean, Mexican folks too. Everybody like, why are we in it? Like, what? We didn't do nothing. Like, literally just existing. But you know how America do, child. So that's another fact. Let's go ahead. Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Child. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All righty. And then here we go. All that media frenzy, racism, which was all just an underground money play, all that started to become policy, right? So by 1936, 29 states had outlawed marijuana. Remember, not based on facts, just gossip. Just gossip. He said, she said. All because a white man was spreading gossip, what he heard. And then in 1937, Congress had passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which formally criminalized cannabis possession. That's another cannabis crooked history fact. Oh. All right. Here we go. 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 Okay. All righty. So that was all the 1930s with the trifling ass trifecta, and then the legislation that therefore happened from there. Again, because of gossip. I can't stress that enough. But then in 1938, Mayor LaGuardia commissioned a team of scientists to investigate the validity of a lot of the bullshit that Anslinger and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics were spewing. So shout out Mayor LaGuardia. It's actually called the LaGuardia Report. If you wanted to look it up, do your research as well. Do your research as well. Double check me, fact check me, all of that. I did my research. Trust. Okay. So the commission, it like Mayor LaGuardia, he commissioned them in 1938. They didn't finish their research until 1944. Scientists, let me tell you something, because if they wanted to do a rush job on this, it could have been something else. But no, they did a full 6 year evidence-based work there. Okay. So the LaGuardia report found that though the Federal Bureau of Narcotics declared that marijuana could spur addiction, they showed that that was a lie. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics declared that marijuana could compel users to commit crimes. This report found that that was a lie. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics declared that marijuana could compel users to engage in devious behaviors. This report found that that was also a lie. Oh, but what did that change? Absolutely nothing. Because politicians still chose propaganda over research. And so after its prohibition in the late 1930s, 78% of marijuana arrests were Black and brown people. And that is another crooked cannabis history fact. 78% of arrests. That's fucked up. My people, my people. Okay. So now we're out of the 1930s and it's the end of the 1930s. And so we're in World War II, right? And so during World War II, the government began the Hemp for Victory campaign. So, when materials were needed for war, like parachutes and different cords, the U.S. Department of Agriculture encouraged the growth of hemp. They were even giving out draft deferments to farmers who grew it. So, you mean to tell me, oh, now we need hemp again because of the war, because that nylon that's made out of, like, what is it, like auto parts, rubber or something, synthetic fiber. We having trouble getting it because we need all of that stuff for war materials. So now they saying, hey, let's grow that hemp again because ooh, that was a natural fiber that has a sustainable grow, and we need sustainability right now. Another cannabis crooked history fact. Cause you see, okay. Okay. So yeah, hemp is cool now when we need it. Child. I want to show you yet again, it was never about morality. It's about that motherfucking money, okay? And racism. And racism. Um, Alrighty. So then, of course, there's an economic boom after the war due to the increase in government spending. And so, Black soldiers coming back from the war, you know, they had a little bit of money in their pocket. So, their wives had to work less. And so, we're like, okay, maybe there's a little hope for Black people. But you know, as soon as we get 5 steps forward, they gonna knock us 10 steps back, okay? In 1956, the Narcotics Tax Act became one of the many laws passed created to enact harsher sentencing practices with up to 10 years in prison. And of course, this was also during heightened Jim Crow. Okay, so now they're using the Jim Crow laws and all of that on top of the Narcotics Tax Act to continue to marginalize and imprison Black people, Black and brown people. That's craziness. That's craziness, y'all. Okay, so that's the 1950s. So then in the 1960s, President Kennedy and later Lyndon B. Johnson commissioned more marijuana testing, which found yet again that marijuana was not a gateway drug and does not lead to violent behavior. And then, of course, in the 1960s, we have the Civil Rights Act, which was signed into law in 1964. And then in 1969, the Supreme Court found that the Marijuana Tax Act was actually unlawful. So it seemed like things were getting just a little bit better for Black people. It's like, okay, we done fought for these rights. Now we have the Civil Rights Act, which signed into law. So it looks like things might get a little bit better for Black people, right? But hell no, you know America, shit get bad again. Well, then in 1970, President Nixon funky ass signed the Controlled Substance Act, which was simply because he was like, oh, the civil rights movement is getting a little too hot. Y'all getting a little too many rights. Okay. And it was impeding on his presidency. And if you don't know, the Controlled Substance Act is what started drug scheduling, which is essentially, which allegedly is really allegedly based on the drug's medical utility and the drug abuse / dependency potential, so that became, so drug scheduling started in 1970. Okay, so remember, I'm gonna keep bringing this up. 1969, the Marijuana Tax Act is unlawful. Then in 1970, with the Controlled Substance Act, marijuana was and still is scheduled as a Schedule 1 substance, meaning it has no medical utility and a high risk of abuse. And that is another crooked cannabis history fact, because that's a lie. That's a lie. Literally, two commissions have already come through and proven that all of it is fake. And yet you signing all this stuff in the law but it's based on hoopla. You can't trust nobody that based all their stuff on hoopla, y'all. Come on. Did SpongeBob tell y'all nothing? We just talked about how they had two commissions already like do some research behind the claims that were being made by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And both of them found that what they were spewing out was a lie. Nixon did the exact same thing. He commissioned his own group of scientists so that way they could prove that what he was saying was correct, that, oh, cannabis has no medical utility. It has all these negative effects, whoop-de-woo. But of course, they couldn't prove his point because he was lying. It wasn't true. It was all a lie. But you know what he did? He suppressed that information. He said, well, you know what? Keep that. Don't tell nobody. Alrighty. And then, so yeah, he didn't give a damn about none of that. Okay. So if you're like, well, why would he suppress that information? Well, of course, he didn't come out right and say it. But one of his aides told Harper's Magazine that we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Mm. And that's another cannabis crooked history fact. Mm. Oh, but don't worry. Keep your materials with you. Keep them close by because, mind you, so they did this in 1970, okay, and then in 1978, the Food and Drug Administration began providing marijuana to a small group of patients under the Compassionate Investigational New Drug Program. Look it up. Look it up. The same government that just told you that marijuana has no medical utility is the same government that then created a program for medical marijuana for patients. Compassionate Investigational New Drug Program. This program is still around, but only has 2 remaining patients. One of those patients receives, actually, you know what? Before I tell you that one, because let me tell you, that one's going to send you to the moon. So I'm going to take a hit right here, anyways, because that, knowing that the same government also provided some people with medical marijuana, though they said marijuana has no medical utility. That's a crooked cannabis history fact. And the fact that it's still going on, that's crazy too. But I want you to guess how many joints you think the government is providing to one of those patients. Yeah, take a moment right now. Put in the comments, how many joints do you think the government is giving this patient today? Like still to this day. Okay, how many joints per month? You take a guess. You take a guess. Put a number in the comment section there. How many joints do you think the government is giving one of those patients per month? I would love to know your answers. I'll take it. Here we go. But you put that in the comments. Let me tell you something. The answer blew me out of the water. Did you put your answer in the chat? Okay, I'll give you just a couple more seconds. Okay. The Food and Drug Administration supplies one patient 300 joints of federally grown weed per month. The federal government gives one person 300 joints per month. In the Compassionate Investigation New Drug Program. The same federal government that says weed is illegal because it has no medical utility and has a high potential for abuse and dependency. That government. That government. That's crooked, y'all. Mind you, all of this started on some gossip. The propaganda started on some gossip. Not even the truth. What? Okay, so that's the 1970s, baby. So then in the 1980s, we got Reagan crusted ass. Oh my gosh. So y'all know him and Nancy was all about, they were starting the war on drugs, which was, of course, as we know, the war on people. Well, the continued war on people because we've been getting beat down. Okay. My goodness. And then, of course, they doing the war on drugs while also pumping drugs and other things, into our communities. which then began an increase in inherent poverty. Because if you pumping all this bad stuff into our communities, that led to defunding for education. It created food deserts. That meant that jobs began moving out of our neighborhoods. And of course, there was over policing, is over policing. And then in 1986, after Reagan had stirred up all that mess, he then signed the Anti Drug Abuse Act, which instituted mandatory sentences. Crack cocaine charges were 100 times more worse than powder cocaine. Possession of 100 marijuana plants was convicted the same as 100 grams of heroin. "100 marijuana plants was the same as 100 grams of heroin," because of how they have the controlled substances lined up, and heroin and marijuana are scheduled the exact same. That is a cannabis crooked history fact, baby. Okay. Yeah, I think it's still around today. Oh, and then of course, y'all boy Bill. Ugly. Look at him now. Bill Clinton doubled down on Reagan's bullshit by instituting the 3-strike rule, which means even higher incarceration levels. And mass incarceration is just slavery 2.0. Okay. And then on top of that, it's also you got to think about the private prison systems. And so the more people they have in jail, the more money that they make. So if they decriminalize cannabis, that's going to take a lot of people out of the jails, out of the prisons, and that's going to take a lot of money out their pockets, because that's what it's always been about. That's what it's always been about. Never actually morally or even science based. It was all about money and racism. Can't stress it enough. Okay. Yeah. So, of course, as you know, things haven't changed much. It's really been up to the states to make the decision on whether or not to decriminalize cannabis. It's really just legalizing cannabis. It's not decriminalizing it completely in a lot of places. But in 1996, California became the first state to allow the sale and use of medical marijuana. And as of today, there are 39 states and 4 U.S. territories that have medical cannabis programs, and there are 24 states that allow recreational use. But it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to completely decriminalize cannabis, as I said. And we need to expunge records also, and we need to pay back those people who have obviously been wrongfully convicted, because again, this was all based on gossip. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on any sort of science or even morally. Like it's not based on any of that. It's based on money. Okay. And I mean, we do have the 2018 Farm Bill. And that was a big leap forward. I will say that it is now legal for American farmers to cultivate hemp as a commercial crop on domestic soil, which is a long overdue development. And it has also catalyzed the public demand for CBD, because with hemp, it might. I don't. Okay, I still got to do a little more digging on like the chemical makeup and stuff. I was not good at chemistry. Let me go ahead and tell you that too. I was not good at chemistry. I was a math girl, but I was not good at chemistry. And so I believe that, well, they say that hemp has a lower THC value. Well, okay. So hemp has a lower THC percentage But it has like other cannabinoids like CBD, and so CBD has grown a lot in popularity. I mean, you see it in all kinds of products, even on just like store shelves and stuff. Um, and so the 2018 Farm Bill allowed for that to be a thing with, you know, the renewed growth of hemp. Okay. So they also call the Farm Bill the AKA Keep Marijuana Illegal Bill. Mm. And that is because the 0.3% THC legal limit that they say, so because like I said, hemp is okay to grow, but it's only okay to grow hemp if it has a 0.3% THC level. It can't be any higher than that, right? And so that 0.3% number is arbitrary. It's not based on anything scientific whatsoever. And so though it is a step forward because now we have hemp, it still keeps us back because it blocks out any medical discovery that can be done, like research for like on marijuana, because a lot of people don't understand that too, because okay. And so with there being like an arbitrary number placed on the level of THC that has to be, well, that can be available in hemp, that then blocks out still a lot of discovery and research that could be done if marijuana was federally, you know, decriminalized, because that means that we could truly test and do more research. And so with it being illegal federally right now, that limits research because people don't want to put funding into that because of its legalities. And like also too, a lot of the funding for research comes from the government. Yeah. So a lot of the money that comes, okay, a lot of the money that is done for research purposes comes from the government, like big government contracts. Because when you think about the commission, again, the different presidents and mayors and people in leadership that have commissioned different scientists to run tests on marijuana, that's because they use their government dollars, like they use their, Lord Jesus, how am I trying to say this? So like they were able to wield their powers to put funding into this type of research. So you see the link between research and government funding with those commissions. And so if we don't have that coming from the government, then how do we continue on in the research without that funding? You see, so that's why there are a lot of, you know, what ifs and maybes, because we're limited in our ability to do research on it, unless it's, you know, backed by a private agency, and well, not private agency, but like, you know, unless it's privately funded. And so that's why the research is growing, but it could be at a faster pace if we decriminalize cannabis. Can't stress that enough. And I did kind of like cruise over the mass incarceration piece, but we will definitely be doing a deep dive on mass incarceration, the prison system, and how it has affected Black communities, because I have a very special guest who has done a lot of research in that space, and I would love to get her opinion, her thoughts, and um her just take on a lot of the things that the war on drugs has done to the prison system. So be on the lookout for that episode, which will come eventually, child. I don't know. I don't know when that was gonna come out. I still gotta, we ain't recording nothing, but it'll come. It'll come. Okay, so get ready for that one. But yeah, that is the history of cannabis in America. This was a long one. It was, but I had to do the deep dive and give you all the tea, because I feel like we're honestly like just flying blind out here, because this information is suppressed. It's not being it's not the real information, the actual evidence behind cannabis is not always at the forefront. It's often suppressed. And as you see now, it is because of money and racism. I can't stress that enough. So, yeah, the crooked history of cannabis in America. My. Well, so thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Operating on High. I am definitely operating on high right now after this episode, but this was definitely interesting to research. It was definitely but I was like, we gotta get the information out there. We gotta get the information out there. So I hope you learned something. I hope you share this information with your friends. You can share them this whole episode, if you want them to tune in. Yeah, what am I supposed to say at the end? I gotta write this down somewhere because I keep messing up on this end piece. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day today. Give yourself some grace. Get a library card and stay dope. Bye. Oh, like, comment, subscribe. Do all of that too. Por favor. Bye.